Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all of you attending today's forum here in Mathematica's Washington, D.C. office and conference center. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to those of you participating via webinar. Before we get started today, please let me remind you here for our in-person audience, if you could please stick around and join us for a networking reception immediately following the forum right here in our 12th floor lobby. As the director of Mathematica's Center for Improving Research Evidence, I'm really glad that you could join us today for this important discussion. Before we get started, I want to let you know a little bit about the center, or CIRE as we call it. It's uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between policy research and practice by offering broad expertise in designing and using an array of scientific research and evaluation approaches in diverse settings. For today's conversation, we're going to focus on micro-credentials and how they might improve individuals' employment outcomes, as well as employment processes for employers, and finally, how they might be effectively integrated into education and training systems. Of course, the promise of micro-credentials is that they allow individuals to gain specific, job-relevant, valuable competencies for a career path at a low cost, and they allow them to do this without necessarily having to take an entire degree program. As you know, though, it's still as hot a topic as it is. It's a little bit of the Wild West out there with respect to micro-credentials, as I'm sure some of our panelists will say, and so we want to unpack that a bit. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. First, we'll hear from Nan Maxwell, a senior researcher here at Mathematica. Nan is an expert evaluator of programs designed to improve youth, prepare youth for successful careers. After Nan's presentation, we'll hear from an industry leader, David Leeser. David developed IBM's Open Badge program, which seeks to bridge the gap from college to career by connecting students with affordable skills. After that, we'll hear from Brenda Perea, who has shaped the national conversation on micro-credentials while working as a special projects manager at Colorado's community college system. Then finally, after Brenda's presentation, we'll hear from Roy Swift, who will discuss his experience with work creds, credentialing, and accreditation programs. We're also thrilled to have two discussants today. Joining us first will be Pam Frugally from the U.S. Department of Labor. She'll offer the federal perspective. And then finally, Holly Zanville from the Luminix Foundation will speak from her perspective as Senior Advisor for Credentialing and Workforce Development. So at the conclusion of Holly's remarks, I'll kick off a panel discussion, and then we'll entertain questions from both our in-house audience and our webinar audience. Please note that we're video recording today's session, so some of you may appear in that video here in the DC office. The video will be posted to our website later in the week. And so to help ensure the highest possible sound quality, I'd ask those of you here in the room to please turn off all your electronic devices. So now it is my pleasure to welcome Nan Maxwell to the podium to address micro-credentials. Do they hold promise?
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to kick off the panel by providing an overview of micro-credentials. Much of the information that I'll be drawing on today comes from a scan that Mathematica conducted, an environmental scan that we conducted using funding from the U.S. Department of Labor. The scan included web search, literature review, and interviews with 26 different credential experts and providers. Micro-credentials are increasingly being touted as both a complement to and an alternative to traditional degrees. However, their role in the credentialing system and what they are is very much hotly debated. That said, our scan did produce a definition, a consensus definition, mind you, of what is a micro-credential. As you can see, it's a credential that shows mastery of one or one or a few job competencies and is more specialized and focused than traditional academic degrees. Of note, this definition does not include licenses, which are minimum government requirements to do a job, because that does not include job competencies. It does, however, include three different other kinds of credentials. Certificates, like degrees, are awarded generally for life after an individual completes coursework and examinations. Short-term certificates can be obtained in generally about a year or less. Longer-term certificates take about a year to 2 years on average. They've increased greatly in the last few years. In 1980, they were 6% of the credentials awarded by institutes of higher ed. By 2010, they were 22% of all credentials awarded by higher ed. Certifications are a little different. They're generally awarded by certification bodies, including industry associations. And they're awarded after an individual demonstrates knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform in a specific job. They're usually time limited, and an individual must get recertified after a given period of time to show that the competencies are current. Currently, or about in 2014, it was estimated that over 4,000 credential bodies existed in the US. Although only about 10% of those had any assurance of quality by an outside party. And last but certainly not least are badges. And badges can be earned in a wide variety of learning environments. They can indicate an accomplishment that is not a degree, a certificate, or a certification. And Xbox 360 actually was one of the first opportunities to earn a badge in 2005. As evidence of their growth, I think that was 2005. By 2015, it's estimated that over 25,000 entities issue badges. Some badges, however, merely represent, I shouldn't say merely, but represent a credential, such as a certificate or a certification, or a degree, actually. And those badges are often digital. They're obtained usually, or oftentimes, through an online platform. And they can convey any information that helps both individuals, job seekers, credential seekers, and employers find out information about the skills that the credential is designed to impart. So what has prompted all this growth in micro-credentials? Most of the reasons are fairly well known, so I'll just cite two statistics. One is that in 2013, 11% of business leaders surveyed said that college graduates were not prepared for work. In contrast, 96% of chief academic officers in higher ed said their students were adequately prepared for work. So this proliferation of micro-credentials has led to an impression of the field, as Anne mentioned, as it being the Wild West. Providers have coined, but not consistently used, a whole bunch of different terms, and that includes the definition of micro-credentials. They've used these terms in different ways. As well, there's not always a clean distinction between a micro-credential and a traditional education program. That said, despite the fact it's the Wild West, our scan was able to identify some common components that differentiate micro-credentials from traditional degrees. And you can see those components in the circles. First are employer involvement. Employers are generally heavily involved in designing and in offering the micro-credential curricula. And David's going to talk a lot about this in the next presentation. Second, there's a whole host of other than employers, players that offer or play a role in micro-credentials. And they include educational institutions, which Brenda will talk about, online platform companies, private online education companies, community-based organizations, industry associations, privately owned and operated companies, and local governments. To add to what some people call a maze here, the skills used to demonstrate competency can be gained in a wide variety of ways. Students can take a single course. They can take a series of courses, which are sometimes called a program and sometimes not called a program. They can simply access materials online without any guided instruction. Any of those are ways you can earn a micro-credential. They can also demonstrate this competency in a wide variety of ways. They can demonstrate competency depending on the program. They can demonstrate competencies through examinations, through a project, more than one project, a portfolio assessment, or any combination of the above. Of note, the way the credentials are obtained has also expanded over time. Massive open online courses, or MOOCs, started or emerged really in 2011 as oftentimes non-credit, low cost, or free courses that really weren't tied to a credential program. By 2016, that's 5 years, over 700 universities were offering close to 7,000 different credit and non-credit courses as MOOCs, with the top 5 MOOC providers, and this is worldwide, registering over 50 million users in 2016. Many of the MOOC providers and platform companies have begun offering credentials on their own. They've launched certificates and degree programs, in fact. In addition, private companies often offer short-term intensive courses. Boot camps are a prime example here that offer mostly software development training. And as evidence of their growth, in 2015, an estimated 91 boot camps in US and Canada graduated over 18,000 students, which is an increase from 41 camps that graduated about 6,000 students in 2013. So the scan also allowed us to identify some opportunities and some challenges facing micro-credentials. 4 different opportunities arose. The first is that providers can respond to changing labor markets fairly quickly by altering credential requirements. And they can do this, particularly as compared to traditional degrees, because micro-credentials are narrower in scope. They can also do it because they are not subject to, for better or worse, to the constraints set forth by accrediting bodies. Second, micro-credentials can build a wide variety of skills. Skills range from fundamental workplace skills to very technical skills for a particular industry sector. Third, micro-credentials are easier to stack than degrees, and this is in large part because they are shorter. And stacking, or building credentials to build opportunities in a given field, can support movement between jobs and between labor markets. Linking the micro-credentials to education programs can further education, as Brenda will talk about in a bit. Fourth, time costs and financial costs are both lower than for degrees. Time costs are lower because generally you can obtain a micro-credential in less than a year, and many times you can get a credential in less than 3 months. A few providers offer financial costs are a lot lower, even when they're stacked. A lot of times, the micro-credentials courses themselves are free, and the certificate is free, or the credential. Sometimes the providers will offer free courses but charge for a credential, but that cost is far less than for a degree. The scan also identified 5 different challenges that might prohibit micro-credentials from reaching their full potential here. First, there's the proliferation of micro-credentials, and providers make it difficult to distinguish the skills that a micro-credential is supposed to impart. Second, even if an employer or a job seeker can understand the skills it's supposed to impart, the quality of a credential is often questioned, as Rory will talk about. There's not a lot of processes in place to ensure quality. Third, existing practices and internal policies often lead employers to require degrees instead of specific job skills. IBM is an example of one company that's trying to change that, and David will talk about that in a bit. And then just fourth, despite being cheaper than degrees, some individuals still are going to have trouble affording the micro-credential. And they oftentimes are not eligible for federal Pell Grant funds or training funds through the American Job Centers. And finally, students need English language skills. They also need basic literacy and numeracy skills to get a micro-credential. If the credential is online, they need internet access, internet literacy, and they need to be self-directed and motivated to set their own and follow their own timelines. We note that in 2014, the U.S. Departments of Labor, Commerce, Education, Health, and Human Services identified 6 practices listed on the slides that showed evidence of success in training programs. And our scan found that micro-credential, promising practices used by micro-credential providers in each of these areas, which suggests that micro-credentials might provide really valuable opportunities for job seekers and employers. However, we don't have the research yet that confirms this potential. So until we do, we answer the question, do micro-credentials hold promise, with a resounding maybe. There's a lot we have to learn, and the slide here identifies some of the areas in which that learning can occur, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge the funding that DOL has provided for this research. Pam, who you'll hear from later, and Gloria Bell were really supportive throughout the whole process and provided us with a lot of insights. And then finally, the team, the project team that really pulled this all together, all here and will be available during the reception to continue the discussion. Thank you, and I'm turning it over to you, David.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to tell you about the IBM program, which started as a very small pilot and now has grown to include the entire IBM company. We started with a very, very small pilot group of about 7 different activities with a team of about 4 people. And now we have about 1,000 activities across the IBM company, different activities being badged. So it's really grown just literally in about a year. You know, we looked at signals that were emerging in the market and started to realize that the way we were developing our skills and development programs and our credentials just simply weren't matching the realities of the modern labor market. And here's a couple examples of some of them. You know, the whole lifestyle changes. People are not working at the same companies that they did as long as they used to. I think Department of Labor probably has better data than I do, but I think it's around 4.2 years is the average that a person is staying at their jobs. You know, people don't have much free time. They need to, you know, get something done very, very quickly. Technology disruptions are huge for us. Cloud has disrupted literally everything, and it has disrupted the skills development to the point now where the pace of change is outstripping the pace of learning for IBM. We're literally doing code drops for our products every 45, 60 days. It used to be every 18 months on CDs, if everybody remembers CDs. Or floppy disks even before, right? You know, blockchain, all these things are growing, all this technology. And then, of course, then there's the big changes in the labor market, right? We have this need for blended skills that are happening. There's a rise of contract labor, a number of different things. I'm not going to read this chart, but there's a lot of different elements that we started to look at these different signals. And we started to say, what's going to impact IBM? What's going to impact our customers? And we put these signals together. We realized, again, back to the whole agile development, we went from 18 months down to about 12 weeks for our delivery of our products. And now it's even shorter than that. It can be even shorter than that. Agile development has changed everything. Cloud, again, has changed everything. We now have this emerging shadow IT. You know, everybody in the audience probably has heard of products like Salesforce.com or other ones like Marketo, where it used to be that IT was very centralized. Now it has shifted out into the lines of business, where a sales manager can just sign up for a subscription to a cloud-based solution that used to have to go through IT. So that has changed everything. Hybrid jobs now are emerging because of that. So back to the marketing example, marketing people, you had to do a marketing plan, you had to know how to segment your market. Now you have to know how to use social media analytics tools. You have to know how to manage social communities. A lot of different technical skills you didn't really have to have even 2 or 3 years ago. New jobs are emerging around these that we didn't even hear about a couple years ago. The rise of teams is changing the way we work, where we're constantly now moving from team to team. We're not typically staying in the same role or the same job in a company all the time. So we wear a lot of different hats. And now, because of faster bandwidth, really a global workforce, we can now connect people in ways that we never thought of even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. This gig economy, I think, is huge. And again, I don't have the Department of Labor statistics, but it is growing, and it's growing very much for IBM, where an enormous number of people that work for IBM are now contract workers, or they're business partners. And people are fluid. They're working sometimes as an employee for the company, sometimes they're working for one of our business partners, and sometimes they're working as a contract worker, or they're working for a customer. So we have a very fluid workforce. And then the last point here is a big topic for us, and there was an article about it in the New York Times yesterday. If you look up new collar jobs or new collar, it's a term that I believe IBM coined. I'm going to give us credit for it. I'm going to give Ginny Rometty, our chairman, credit for that, where we're saying these old vocational jobs are now being infused with technology. And you think about it, when you go to get your car serviced, that person needs to know how to use a CRM system to communicate with you, right? So all of these jobs are changing. So we have this opportunity now to tap into an employment base by just infusing them with a little bit of IT skills and build them up to really valuable jobs. On any given day, IBM has probably about 3,000 open recs for jobs, open job recs. And if you look at our largest centers in Raleigh or in Austin and some other areas, probably about 25 to 30% of the people who work in those centers no longer require a traditional 4-year degree. We're now focused more on skills than we are on degrees. So now we're starting to say, and in fact, I look at the job descriptions, which I used to look at them and say, I'm not even qualified to work here. You know, 20 years of this. But now I'm looking at them, and we have taken off a lot of the different degree requirements and replaced them with skills requirements. So that's really what new collar is all about. And you can read a lot more about it if you just do a Google search on new collar. So we looked at all these different signals. Said all these things are changing so quickly. People are fluid. They're moving all over the place. It's hard to, how do you take the inventory of the skills that people have, and how do you start to identify how to put people in the right positions at the right time? We realized that there were basically 5 different requirements for a new credential program we had. I'm just going to pull them up on the screen fast so they paint better. They have to be timely. We used to, again, have our certification program came out every 2 years based on the life cycle of our products, right? Nobody's going to get certified every 45 days. It's just not possible, right, to do that. So we need something that's very, very timely. We need something that's verifiable. That was a big point you brought up, Nan, too. It has to be verifiable. We need to have complete transparency on that. We needed them to be portable. People are moving again from job to job, this whole new economy, gig economy, everything else. So they need to be portable. They need to be discoverable. This is a big issue, I think, and this is something that we're going to start to tackle at IBM this year. How do we make them more discoverable in the systems that we have for resource management, hiring, and all these other things? And then they have to be differentiating. You mentioned, I forget what the number was you mentioned about the number of badge programs that are out there right now. How do you differentiate? That's what the bachelor's degree and these other traditional degrees were designed to do, to differentiate you from your competitors. How do we do that? I think there are amazing opportunities now by layer stacking digital credentials together to create unique certificate and certification programs. So we developed 5 different unique emblems for the IBM program that we felt encompassed the full breadth of the different activities at IBM. We wanted to follow a model that we thought would cover everything, provide the flexibility to the different business units at IBM. Again, we have about 400,000 people, and we have business units everywhere. And each one of them has not only requirements for its business unit, but then regional requirements too. So we decided, let's create knowledge badges. They're the green badges. Let's create skills badges. Let's create real proficiency badges, a person that can demonstrate a real competency as well. So I think about it like a photography analogy. Knowledge would be reading the manual, right? Skills would be I can hold the camera, I know what an f-stop is, right? But can I take a award-winning photograph? Can I produce something that is marketable? That would be a real proficiency. Then we also decided we would layer on top of our existing certifications a badge on top of that. And then we also have a badge for, it's really more of a membership badge. It's an achievement badge for a number of different programs we have, scholarship programs, internship programs, and some others as well. Badging, we believe, is how we're going to be able to measure resume-worthy skills, IBM skills in the market. We think that it'll be a good signal for employment and employability in the market. So those are the 5. Well, the results in our pilot, we did this pilot, and we started with a MOOC. We started with bigdatauniversity.com, which is now renamed cognitiveclass.ai. But if you look up bigdatauniversity.com, you'll see a lot of interesting things up there, an enormous number of free courses on data science that you can take. And we decided we would try to improve the performance of Big Data University. It was already doing very well. We had about more than 100,000 registered users up there. But like any other MOOC, people were going up, starting the courses. They weren't finishing the courses. They certainly weren't taking the exams at the end of the courses. So we thought, what if we could increase the number of people coming up there by 10% and increase the number of people completing the exams by 25%? We thought that would be a really good number. Well, the numbers here, you can see the number of enrollments went up by 129% after we introduced badges. And by the way, part of our pilot was to try to isolate all the different external factors. You know, if an executive goes out and starts talking about Big Data University, it's going to drive people up there, right? Nothing really happened during the 6-week period that we did this test, other than adding badges. It was really the big variable. The number of people completing the courses went up by more than 200%. And then the big number there, of course, the people completing that assessment at the end, you have to do that to get the badge, went up by almost 700%. It really, we had to do the math multiple times to make sure we didn't have that decimal point in the wrong place. It was phenomenal. So we found early on that the results were going to be really significant for IBM. We've now found more results from the program. Our certifications for cloud, by adding badgeable activities up to a certification, we increased the certification test pass rates by more than 64%. So it's kind of like if you get somebody to read the first chapter of the book, chances are they're going to read the rest of it. So, you know, people feel like a certification sometimes a little bit unwieldy. So it is improving really our high-stakes credentials as well. So that's just a little bit of data on the performance of the program. What I want to leave you with is a couple things. We've decided early on that this program was all about employment and employability. We're always looking for the end game. How do we start to create opportunities for people? How do we start to solve the skills problem we have in the tech industry? How do we solve it for IBM and for its customers? And what's not on this chart, and I have it on some other slides probably on our website, is that we embedded job opportunities right into the badges through Pearson Acclaim. That's the platform we use. So literally, when you earn an IBM badge, if you click on your badge in your badge wallet or badge backpack, you'll be able to see all the jobs that are tied to your skills in real time. So, like, for example, if you have design thinking skills, you click on the design thinking skills tag in your badge, and it'll open up in real time all of the, in the English-speaking world, and also I think in Brazil. It'll show you all the jobs, the titles, the salaries, the locations, and then you can double-click on it and drill all the way down in to apply for that job. And it's all in real time. And I just want to leave you with this one last story, and it makes me teary-eyed every time I see it, because this is really what it's all about for all of us. A woman who was trying to find a job, and she couldn't find one. She'd been out of work for just a couple of years. I think she was raising her family. And when she came back in the tech world, that's an eternity. And so she tried finding a job. People said, your skills are out of date. She went up to bigdatauniversity.com. She took the free data science analytics courses up there. She said the first, when we intentionally, by the way, we made the first one relatively easy to get on the leaderboard. It's still resume worthy, but it's foundational level. Any one of you that is listening or watching could go up to Big Data University and take the foundational level course on big data and earn an IBM digital credential. So she did that. Then she found it gets harder, right? So, I mean, we wanted to get people on the leaderboard. And then she went through the second, third, and fourth badges in the sequence. And again, they're a lot harder to get to when you get to that level. So she developed very sophisticated skills for free online, earned IBM digital credentials, and then she resubmitted her resumes and she got a job. So to me, that's what it's all about. That's what makes us smile.
Hi, I'm Coletta Teskey. I'm a freelance writer. I'm currently working as an information architect, and I live in Tampa Bay, Florida. I had been out of work for a couple of years, and when I came back to work, my skills were out of date, and I did not have any current work experience on my resume. I decided to take courses through Big Data University after I saw a tweet from IBM Training. I think the digital badges helped me get a job because they increased my confidence. And after I earned the badges and I saw that I could get my skills back up real quick, my confidence level took a big jump, and I think that helped a lot in getting a job.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Brenda, and she's going to talk about her program.
Thanks, David.
I just want to let you know, Colorado truly is the wild, wild west. We tend to do stuff differently out there. And I'm not from Colorado, so I can say that. What's interesting about Colorado is that the Colorado Community College system has 13 colleges, 39 campuses, and serve about 145,000 students per year. Large system. And our badge journey, our digital badge journey started when employers were expressing their frustration with the number of unqualified advanced manufacturing jobs that were unfilled. In 2013, we had 15,000 unfilled advanced manufacturing jobs, and each year it compounded. So by 2014, we had 30,000 unfilled advanced manufacturing jobs, and that was really impacting not only our employers' return on investment, but it was also impacting the state's economy. And that was a big driver for both what we were going to do and how we actually did it. And one of the biggest things that actually our governor came out and said is that when he meets with business people, they say, your students can't do math. And that was just like, oh my gosh, every single one of our students have to take a math course to get a certificate or degree. What's happening out there, right? So when we analyzed our programs and our certificates and our degrees, and our students are graduating with highly sought out advanced manufacturing certificates and degrees, yet there were varying levels of proficiency, as well as there's a mismatch of what our employers were thinking our students were graduating with and what they could actually do on the job floor, totally different. So it all boils down to the fact that employers are seeking out alternative ways to manage talent, both in hiring qualified applicants, as well as investing in their current workforce. Employers requested a better way to identify true competency, a way to identify skills or competencies not evident in transcripts, and an easily verifiable way to see if the skills were aligned to nationally recognized standards of skills based on identified competencies. In responding to employers' needs, our CCCS system president, Dr. Nancy McCallan, announced digital badges would be issued within our system to meet employer needs for credentials focused on workforce credentials. This all sounds nice and good, but when that was given to me in 2014, I freaked out because it was just like, how are we supposed to produce this by the end of the year and actually have somebody buy into this, right? Because this is a new credential. What are we going to have to do? So we started working really hard. Me and my team started working really hard. We started to identify competencies and skills with digital badges within our own programs. And when we started doing that and doing site visits with both our employers and our students started figuring out, wow, what we're learning actually applies to what's happening in the workplace. Before, I'm not the best person, but I understood what I was learning was going to be applied out in the workforce. Somehow we had that disconnect within our system. The students didn't understand what they were learning and how to apply it on the job site. So right now we have regional employers. We have a lot of regional employers who have actually taken up the digital badge challenge. We have Colorado Department of Transportation, Ball Seal, which is a defense contractor, Sundyne, which is a high-end pump manufacturer. We have CMAX, which is an international firm. And we also have Hunter Douglas, the person who does your blinds and windows, right? So for a peek, I wanted to give you a glimpse on how in the real world digital badges work. In Colorado, if we take our own Colorado Department of Transportation, as a state agency, they have been badging middle skills within their department for a couple of years. They identify all of their workers' competencies with digital badges, not just job titles. And what they do is they create highly agile, effective teams with the right skills when and where they need them. Again, we're from Colorado. It's the wild, wild west out there. We have a lot of high and low temperatures. And so we frequently have huge boulder falls, rock falls on I-70, which is the major east-west thoroughfare, right? And it shuts down the major highway for, could be 1 or 2 days. And you can't ask cross-country truckers to go down these little tiny state roads to try to get to California if they're coming from the East Coast and vice versa. So what DOT does with their badges is they end up, when there's a rock fall on I-70, they go into their talent management system and they look for experts in geology to assess the remaining danger. They look for employees who can be pulled from other areas of the state who are explosive experts who can reduce the size of the boulders. They find employees with skills to operate the correct heavy machinery to move those tons of rock. They resurface the highway and they ensure the interstate is safe to open again. That's how our companies are actually using digital badges. They're pulling together effective teams, not just for once, but continually changing up their teams to be able to make sure that they're doing the right thing. At CCCS, if you look at the badges we've developed here, we've developed them in technical math, machining, engineering, graphics, and the 21st century skills in healthcare. We consciously, in 2014, when I was given the direction to actually do digital badges, we consciously made the decision not to badge our courses, our certificates, and degrees, because those are transcripted. We don't have to repeat our process. What we needed to do is drill down to what employers are looking for and make sure that they could see that from our students' perspective. We set the bar high. Obtaining a badge, you have to get 80% or higher on whatever assessment there is and provide evidence of that assessment. There's always, the badge always ties to an industry standard, a system standard, a national standard, or any other standard that we've actually identified that the workplace needs. If we're going to drill down and look at our digital badges for technical math, we too launched a MOOC. I can tell you right now, the last year was an epic fail on my part. We built this MOOC in response to our employers saying your students can't do math. So we built the MOOC and it ran 10 quarters and yay, we did an awesome job. In the last 4 quarters of the MOOC, we actually introduced digital badges. And I'll tell you why it was an epic failure on my part. I was responding to the employers' demands that our students didn't know how to do math skills in the advanced manufacturing floor. So I built it for our current students. They could go into the MOOC, figure out how math is contextualized in lathe or CNC milling or any of that, and they could walk out with something that was free and it could actually upskill them in what their current job was. Well, what we found out is when we surveyed the students, the participants, there was 4,191 participants. During the last year, our participants increased, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. I ended up finding out that our Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association had released our MOOC to all of their members and said, you guys could use this because it's free training and your employees can get an actual credential out of it. Our employees were actually sending their employees to the math MOOC to earn specific digital badges, usually in ratio, proportions, and percents, units of measures, vectors, trig, some of these very weird skills that advanced manufacturing needs. So you can see with the badges, there was 923 participants during our last year, 727% or 70% completed at least one subtopic. And of that group, almost half of them completed a topic to earn a major badge. And they took that major badge back to their employers, and their employers either decided to keep them as employees, or they actually upskilled them into a new area, which was really positive for not only our students or not. And then one of the things that we also expanded into non-credit workforce training. What ended up happening is once our employers were exposed to digital badges and the technical math, they asked for a way to differentiate their employees then through our non-credit workforce training to see those who just participated, never got badges, and those who actually mastered the competency got badges. In our ecosystem, you can't build badges in a vacuum, and it becomes a currency, so you have to actually start building this ecosystem. So CCS collaborates with our K through 12 partners in Colorado, like Widefield High School and Peyton ISD, as well as four-year institutions such as Metropolitan State University Denver, as well as CSU Online Fort Collins. We also go out to the economic development boards in Denver and Adams County and Colorado Springs, and you really have to build trust between the new credential you're providing employers, your reputation, and what they're actually getting for that product. And that's how CCCS actually identified and developed their badge system. And I'm going to turn it over to Roy.
Well, Brenda, that's a great introduction about talking about quality. You know, quality for who? Quality for the person, quality for the institution. What is quality? It's a pretty vague term out there, and particularly because of micro-credentials and the evolving definition of what it is all about. I made some assumptions as I was thinking about micro-credentials, and I thought that these four characteristics that we should be thinking about in order to make a judgment whether is this a micro-credential, is this a credential, is this not a credential? Even the word credential is a term that we struggle with a lot. But I saw micro-credentials as something as a component of or related to another type of credentials, that they're stackable. That if you get one, it should be connected to something else. If it's micro, there must be something that's macro, right? And so it seemed logical that we would look at this sequence in this way. And that they're short term, and I just kind of made up the 6 months deal. I have no idea what short term is when you come right down to it. But short term in nature, and that they are flexible and can adapt to change in a fast-changing environment. I think we heard David talk about 45 days of change, and the credentialing world is not used to thinking that way at all. And you can imagine the degrees. It takes 10 years to change to the degree, or even now what we call nano degrees, whatever those are. We assume they could be part of micro-credentials in this regard, but they're flexible, can adapt and change to a fast changing environment, and based on stakeholder input. Now, we heard in Colorado, listening to the stakeholders, sometimes they can get you in trouble, and sometimes it's a pretty important thing. But there's a lot of mistakes made with credentials these days saying that they had stakeholder input. Maybe they had one person at an advisory committee meeting who said, yeah, that looks right to me. Not representative of the population in which it is serving. And I'm going to be a little controversial with saying, you know, the more I'm thinking about certifications, I'm not sure certifications are a micro-credential. First of all, that word term can mean anything. Most of the time, I would say at least 30% of the time, when somebody says they have a certification, they really have a certificate program. They have training that measures learning outcomes of that course or courses. That is not certification, as you heard at the beginning by Nan, when we talked about a standardized exam through a very specialized job analysis process that is also time limited, and the part that probably 80% of the people who call themselves having certificate have no process for taking it away. Certification was designed to be public protection, not enhancing the profession. And unfortunately, it has got misused along the way. So this whole idea of assumptions, we got to get the assumptions right. I don't know if these are the right assumptions, but if we get these assumptions right, then we'll know how to evaluate quality. Otherwise, it's a shot in the dark. Oh, maybe we should evaluate this, maybe we should evaluate this. So micro-credentials should be held to specific standards and criteria for quality. They should be no different than the regular degree or the certificate in the higher education system. Frankly, boot camps, which there are 91 and growing in this country. Jane, from Department of Labor was telling me the other day that she thinks that this is the next horizon that we need to be thinking about in regard to boot camps and quality and standards that need to be done, because there is such a rapid rise of them that the quality is going to be all over the place. So micro-credentials should not be exempt from that. So here are some quality criteria that I am thinking that may apply in this regard. First of all, the establishment of a micro-credential should be based on evidence to meet a market need. There shouldn't be, oh, I'm going to produce this, you know, this sort of thing. So it needs assessment and what is done, which may need to be done in 45 days, because that need may change. Process for identifying validated competencies. Not just competencies, we need to be talking more about validated competencies. Validated learning outcomes should include input from the appropriate stakeholders. And I talked about the stakeholders not representing populations which they're serving. Thirdly, there should be ongoing systematic processes to continually evaluate the validity of the competencies and learning outcomes. As we heard today, they're constantly spinning out of validity. It's like entropy, that, you know, more and more they go. And so there is a process of where we must continually evaluate. It's not in the certification world, every 5 years we'll do a job analysis. I don't think so. That's a complete dinosaur concept in this regard. And then, frankly, curriculum probably gets seen less, even if you're talking about a micro certificate or a nano degree or something of this sort. So it's a very different paradigm that we need to be looking at in regard to this. And then the alignment of the content, learning strategies, and assessment of learning. Frankly, one of the reasons that I think we have the skills gap to today is because we do terrible in assessing competency. We might have identified the right competencies initially, but we don't assessment to see if the person learned or actually has those. Now, IBM looks like they have a very close partner, but IM is an exception to the policy in many respects when looking at this sort of thing. So a lot of times you'll say, well, they learned this, but they assessed it differently. They say they're supposed to demonstrate that, but they gave them a multiple choice test. And so we've got to have this alignment between content, learning strategies, and assessment of learning. And then assessments that measure what they're supposed to measure, the validity and reliability. And frankly, in the educational world, we're not used to thinking in those terms. We're more used to, of instruction, instructor-developed assessment tools, which may or may not. Remember that when you were a student in class and you say, well, that final exam had nothing to do with what the teacher was teaching, right? And so we need to think of that as we're thinking of the micro-credentials. And then provide clarity and transparency of how the credential connects to other credentials and how it may fit in a career pathway. We no longer want to talk about credentials in isolation. We want to know how credentials connect and that there might be multiple pathways, not a linear pathway, but a latticing pathway in this regard. And then lastly, systematic program evaluation that leads to continuous quality improvement. Naturally, WorkCred is a spinoff of the American National Standards Institute, which is an element in ISO. And of course, continuous quality improvement, quality management systems is a big deal. You don't do anything without having that in. We in the credentialing world need to think about that more. That we must begin a continuous quality improvement process with credentials in this arena. And I will then turn it over to my friend and colleague, Pam, Department of Labor.
I'm very glad to be invited to this session because I've learned quite a bit about micro-credentials and badges. I wanted to give a little bit of background because I'm from Department of Labor, so I have to cite some statistics, right? The current population survey collected that 17.8% of the population in 2015 had a certification or license, and that's a quarter of the employed people. And the most common was a license, though, at 22.4% and 3%. And so some of those also have certifications, as the group mentioned. And 3% had a certification, but not a license. But that seems to be more common in IT in the tech world. And the data also showed that, again, the more educated people have more of these credentials as well. People who already have degrees have credentials. So, because one of the focuses of this study was on, can micro-credentials work for low-skilled workers, you know? But there's still, you know, a good percentage there. And the data also showed that people with certifications and licenses had lower periods of unemployment and also higher wages, just like we found with degrees. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole discoverable issue. That's something that we at Department of Labor have tried to address. And so we have, you know, an online tool called Career One Stop, and in it there is a portal for credential seekers. And in that there are a tool to search certifications and one to search occupational licenses across the states and the federal government. So the certification finder, you can search by all these things, keywords, certification name, organization, industry, or occupation. I have to admit, we don't have badges in there. We have, like, I think something like 5,800 certifications, but I realize that we don't have everything. But it's a good existing source, right? And this is what the information looks like. So if you search for logistics, you see these certifications from various organizations. And we've also added other information here. So we have type. You'll see core, advanced, specialty, and product equipment certifications. You'll also see icons that I'll talk about in a moment. So I think we want to, you know, see how we can augment this, and I believe Holly's going to address some of the ways that in the future we might be able to keep up with this rapid proliferation of credentials and badges. So right now what we do is take information that's available on the web. So we then link to the certifying organization. This example is Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, and also to the page about the actual certification so you can find out more about it. But it's totally dependent on what they display on those pages. So some have more information than others. Even our information on state licenses. Some states provide all kinds of descriptive information and some just say, we issue this license, right? So the icons, though, we have tried to address this issue of quality through these. And we've also tried to address labor market demand. Just recently, the Career One Stop is a national site, so just in the past year we added this hot chili pepper. So it is based on job postings, and so certifications that are mentioned in lots of job postings nationally are marked with a chili pepper. And I don't know if the screen I didn't have any with chili pepper, but there are many. We note all the ones that are accredited by the American National Standards Institute and those that are accredited by the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. So that is a measure of quality. We also have an eye for those that are industry endorsed. So, for example, the National Association of Manufacturers, they have a list of certifications that they recognize. Also the Health Professions Network, so those are marked. We also work with the military credentialing opportunities online sites to identify those that are related to military training, and there's a couple other icons. But also, I think what we're looking at Department of Labor, especially under our new legislation, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, is we're going to be looking at outcomes as a measure of quality. We're going to be looking at employment and at retention and at wage increases. Now, whether or not we can drill down to specific credentials, I mean, I think that information will exist more at the state level, because by the time they report up to the national level, we'll have, more general idea, more aggregated. But I think that program evaluations and other things will be able to follow and say, yes, these credentials, these badges are working. And also, I mean, under the legislation, which we call WIOA, we're emphasizing sector strategies. So these partnerships with employers to say, so what skills do you need? What do we do? So, I mean, I'm very glad to hear about these efforts at IBM in Colorado, and I think, we're going to point people to this webinar to learn more about this, the people out in the system who are really doing the training down at the local level. So, and then I'll turn it over to Holly, who I think is going to tell you about the future of credentials. Too much pressure?
And I'm going to stay right here. Easier just to talk here. So while everyone's been talking, I've been doing vote tallying to answer this question that was posed at the beginning, micro-credentials, do they hold promise? So I heard Dan say, be careful, researcher, maybe. I heard David and Brenda from Colorado say, they're already delivering promise. They're already delivering. Roy, I think, maybe said yes, but we have to look at the quality issues. And I didn't really hear a vote from Pam, but and I'm gonna vote from Lumina's perspective as we're already seeing that the trains have left the station. Whether or not we've done enough research, which we have not, admittedly, we think the trains have left the station. There's a tremendous amount of activity going on in the credentialing marketplace, and the words like non-degrees and alternative credentials, whatever, are sending a signal that we're not sure about the quality of them, and but truth be told, we're not always so sure about the quality of our degrees and our even licenses, et cetera. And within this big tent, all these credentials are circulating, and we're trying to understand more and more what these things all mean and how they're going to serve us, employers and students, learners, going forward. Several of us are involved in an effort called Credential Engine, which has one simple mission: try to bring transparency to the credentialing marketplace. And when we're talking about credentials, we are talking about degrees, licenses, certifications, certificates, et cetera, badges, et cetera. And I go back to that word discoverable. We think as we move to Google land, and many of the industry sectors are already there, but education is not, that we could bring credentialing into Google land, where we can understand what are the various credentials. Apps can be built to try to tailor-make information about the credentials, the meaning, the value, where they're located, help with navigation for career counselors, specialty purposes for different kind of populations like military, et cetera. And we're in the really now trying to build out something called Credential Engine. So if you go and do a search, you'll find Credential Engine there and see that it's a new nonprofit trying to move quickly in an environment which is going super quickly to capture all different kinds of credentials so that we can then move into building apps to over the next several years. This isn't going to be done in the 1 year. It's amazing that IBM could do as much as 1 year. Colorado in just a couple of years. We're going to go as fast as we can to try to capture credentials, and with the hope that they will be more and more discoverable and we can make sense of this world. So I want to be sure that you all have time to ask questions, but I want to share with you, if we were in school together and you asked to borrow my notes because you weren't there that day, I would just tell you that the kind of notes I do is I pick out the things. I'm a selective listener, so I pick out the things that I think are really important that I want to remember. That doesn't mean that it covered the class well, ever, but that's what I do. So I just want to tell you what I've written on my paper that I think are really important takeaways. So, and they're not in any order. I didn't have time to prioritize them for you. But one is, I really like this idea of new collar jobs where IT is being infused all over the place, and so that says liberal arts students as well as manufacturing, everybody, you're going to have IT infused and you're going to have to develop some skills. So I just love that idea about new collar jobs. I think it's really meaningful that 20-some%, I didn't get the final number, David, of IBM hiring centers are no longer requiring the degree, but looking at skills. That is a canary in the mine for everybody else. So I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. I think that the whole idea of verification systems, if we look at our resumes where we're on LinkedIn or we have our standard resume, or a lot of us probably have all of the above in our toolkit, is resume-worthy skills. That becomes the new resume. And how you turn your list of, I don't know, all the jobs you held, which probably have the years and the names and where you worked, that may not be a resume-worthy skill resume. So I used resume twice. But I think that's an important something that I took out of that. The partnering that we heard about Colorado, partnering with K-12, with education, with the workforce boards, with employers, et cetera. That is the name of the game in the credentialing market, and we're all going to have to be involved in that. And it's a good thing because our systems, the way we tend to silo, has to break down and is breaking down in this new credentialing, micro-credentialing environment. I think the quality criteria one, Roy, I gave you 2 stars on my little notes. Okay. Because it won't be very meaningful for micro-credentials or any of our credentials if that doesn't stand for quality, and so people can have a sense of trust in them. So I think we all have to think about how are we going to assess quality going forward. This notion that it's going to take us so long and we have to plan years ahead, particularly if you write a grant proposal, it's going to take me 5 years to do this. No, we heard from IBM in Colorado. They did something really fast, made real game changer changes really in a year or a little more than a year. And time is going fast. That's the way the world is going, and we all have to accommodate that as well. So 2 more. Credentials have to be discoverable. That means those of you who keep your credentials in PDFs and in Word documents and you're hiding them into your websites or in an academic department's place or in an employer and wherever you hide yours there. Increasingly, if they're discoverable, we'll be able to set up systems where we can understand the meaning and then connectivity among our credentials in order to get to the transparency that we think we're all going to need. And the 5th one, and this really speaks more to the learner, which I think is a good one around students, is MOOCs and low-cost and open platform courses and programs really are out there to help people if they can learn through online, which is going to be incredibly important if they can, but that people can figure out a way to help themselves to get onto pathways, to get onto highways, to live in the changing world. So I'm just going to stop there, but those are my notes from the class we just shared.
Good note.
Holly, well, first let me say thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to start us off. I'll address a couple of questions to the panelists, and then we'll open it up to both the in-person and webinar audiences. But Holly, you actually teed me up really well for the question I really wanted to start with, which was, to some extent, it gets to discoverability, but there's a lot more than that going on. Are there particular populations for whom micro-credentials are most readily accessible, or are there populations for whom they're not readily accessible? And what does that mean for how we need to think about discoverability, accessibility, and so on? And I don't have a particular order, so if anybody wants to jump right in, go right ahead and jump in. Make sure, please, your microphones are on.
Well, I particularly think I've just been so enamored with this 30% dropout rate in secondary education and the need for micro-credentials at that level, which we don't think about. We think about more of the adult type arena, and they need something quick, something relevant, that can get them jobs. And it goes with this whole business of looking at competency versus, frankly, maybe a high school diploma in this regard, because people are saying that the bachelor's degree is the default high school diploma these days in looking at that. And the other thing I want to say is that it's all right. I am a true believer that we need to move to competency as the common currency, but it's all in the evaluation game because I believe that too often people are advertising that they have these competencies when in reality they don't.
Yep.
And can I piggyback on that? I think you're absolutely right. in that, the 30% or whatever percentage it is, they're the ones that I think can benefit a lot from this. But currently, we talked to virtually one of the things that everyone agreed on in our interviews was that, you really need some basic literacy skills. You really need to do this. You really need, English language fluency. You really need, particularly if they're online, you need computers and you need computer access. You can't do this stuff on your phone, which is where, a lot of those 30%, that's how they access the internet is over their phone. And, so I think in order to reach those populations, we've really got to make a concerted effort, to build in some supports.
I think you're absolutely right. Some of the research that I did in self-directed learning over probably too long ago, but one of the things that kept coming up is that you can't just say, go self-direct, go learn a MOOC, because the ego strength in education, I'm talking specifically ego strength in education, which affects the personal image also, but you cannot have intrinsic motivation if you don't feel good about trying to learn. If learning only makes you think you're dumb, then you're not willing to enter that arena because it's threatening to you in this regard. So I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think that's what we're seeing in this country today. The weak are getting weaker and the stronger are getting stronger.
Yeah. Brenda, I thought you were going to say something.
Well, we also have to consider how the employers are actually looking for candidates. I think that's a big part that we're not addressing. When I was going out and actually, when we develop our badges are not developed internally and then pushed out to the market. It has to come from the market internally. And when I go out to talk to employer groups, and they're always talking about how do they find qualified candidates, and how do they identify which is a quality candidate versus one who's just proficient, right? So that's one of the things that spurred CCCS to actually reach down into the K through 12 market is if we're in the 2-year space, if we're preparing those students to eventually move to a 4-year institution, we actually have to reach back into the K through 12 space and ensure that those students are actually getting the same opportunities that we're affording everybody else. So that's basically my take on it, is that we truly have to think both ways.
Yeah.
You asked which groups underserved, and I think that the alternative education programs seem like they're grasping and really jumping on this more quickly than the more traditionals. And you mentioned the K through 12.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned the need to understand at the micro level the types of skills people have. And I think when we see a bachelor's degree from somebody that maybe graduated with an English degree, I really don't know if that person has problem-solving skills, if they know how to debate, if they know how to communicate.
Yeah.
When I get this macro degree from somebody, whether it's a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree, it doesn't tell me very specifically if they have the soft skills that they need to have to be in the workforce. So I think that it does start with K through 12.
Great, great. I have many, many more questions, but I want to give the people here in the room and on the webinar a chance to ask. Anybody right up here, Steve, please take the microphone to ask your question. And if you could just quickly identify yourself too, please.
Sure. My name is Lisa Stern, and I am a doctoral candidate, not a doctoral student anymore, but doctoral candidate at George Washington University. So I want to thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you all. I came in today. My background is actually workforce development, career development. People with disabilities. I've been in the one-stops. I've probably done a little bit of so much of what all of you are doing. So I got the information about micro-credentials and was very piqued. It piqued my curiosity because my dissertation is actually on veterans with service-connected disabilities who are thriving in the civilian workforce. So that aside, I have to say I'm more confused now than when I came in, which is I'll take that as a good thing. But so I have a ton of questions, but I will ask hopefully just one or two. So I'm confused about the language, but I think that's always going to be the case because we always bring in these new words to mean things that we've kind of done before, but they're not really. And so it gets confusing for the job seeker, and then it gets confusing for the employer. So our badges, employer-specific, industry-specific, or skill-specific, all of the above, or all of the above?
Yeah, that's a great
Should rephrase
question.
that question.
Yeah. So are badges employer-specific, industry-specific?
Job-specific?
All of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above.
And part of it is because
Right.
we're actually meeting those workplace skills that they're needing. Like with our non-credit training, those are employers who are asking the community college system for very specific skill set training, but they want to differentiate who they're paying to actually go through this training and who's just participating. Well, that's all right, but they want to know who actually gained competency by an actual assessment and evidence. So those are very specific employer badges, whereas industry badges, like our machining level 1 badges, were based on the National Institute of Metalworking Skills. So that's a national standard. So that's a national industry. Whereas our technical math, that was an internal standard that we put these things through. So they can range for all of them.
Okay. And then I'll just ask one more question, because I know other people, and I'm sure you have questions coming in, because I can talk someone's ear off later. So the other question is, all right, now work keys. So I'm curious about, so a lot of what I was hearing earlier just made me immediately, and I haven't thought about work keys in a number of years, but it immediately made me think about work keys. So are we reduplicate, or not read, that's not even the word. What's the difference?
Yeah.
And or can they be used in conjunction? And then I will add one additional comment about considering how these badges, not only on Career One Stop, but within ONET. Because if there are badges identified for specific industries or specific jobs, then I think more of a job seeker population might find them, or a career counselor may help them. They may find that through ONET, not versus, but in addition to. Okay,
Let's
I'll
just
leave it at
clarify, work keys and ONET are both out of DOL to try to identify specific, work keys is not, excuse me.
ACTs.
Right, it's ACT.
Yeah.
ONET is out of DOL, specifying very specific competencies.
But the badges tend to develop immediate need. ONET is more what the industry has said that for that moment in time are the competencies, and Pam certainly is the expert in this. Right.
Well, the sunshine is for bright outlook, that's employment demand, but we have actually been adding technology skills because, yes, ONET has this framework that is sort of stayed stable over time so that we can do some comparisons, but because of the rapid change in the technology world, we're capturing things like Apache Pig and Hadoop and Ruby on Rails and putting them in there and also identifying them. They use a hot fire instead of a chili pepper, but as ones that are mentioned in employer job postings. So, as I was listening here today, I was thinking, boy, we maybe do need to get badges into ONET, but we haven't done that yet. But if there are badges for the things that we've identified as hot technology skills, that certainly would be a link to them. You could see, Apache Pig is a hot technology skill, let me go find a badge for it, right? So it still would be a pointer, I think.
I personally think there should be some standards. Naturally, I'm a spinoff of a standard organization, so that's not without bias that I would say this. But I am concerned that we need more transparent, and there are groups that are working on it. I do know that ANSI had a standard developing organization trying to develop an American national standard around and making it general, and they gave up because there's so much disagreement about what a criteria or standard could be. And the people who conceived of this do feel that it needs to be flexible and adaptable, and they think the standard is too encompassing, that it may stagnate what it could be. I think there's a happy in between here. I don't know what David thinks about an IBM.
Well, it's a good question, and I don't think you can really, back to that whole idea of standards, IBM standards are going to be very different from somebody else's. I think you get a bachelor's degree in English from one school and you get it from a different school, they're going to be very different.
Oh, right.
I think what you need, though, is you need transparency,
Mm-hmm.
and you also need Well, the common language, the taxonomy. And I think that's another thing with ONET, for example. We have our own taxonomy at IBM. Yeah. ONET has a taxonomy. There's a European taxonomy. Everybody has a taxonomy. If there's a way to translate those, I think that's a big inhibitor, really, is how do we start to connect, and I think, Roy, you mentioned this, how do you start to connect the content to the delivery to the credential?
Right.
And then how do you translate that? Because these things are changing all the time. How can ONET stay on top of something that is changing every 5 minutes?
Yeah.
We do think credential engine, Holly gave you could be one of the elements that can begin looking at, because there's going to be what they call the CTDL language. It's a whole bunch of descriptors about how you're supposed to describe. It will help us look at trends of certain credentials and what they call it. And I'm particularly interested, even though we think we know what a certification is, what the descriptors are going to be, that we will be able to see the great diversity. And if we are going to put badges on the credential engine registry also, and that will allow us to begin to see the variety of what goes under that rubric called badges, and may be helpful as we further define what things are.
Brenda, I know you wanted to say something, and then we'll turn to a question from the webinar.
One of the things I wanted to address was work keys, ACTs. We hear a lot in the community college system that K through 12 students and post-secondary students need 21st century skills, and you hear it all the time, 21st century skills. And we did actually run up against that issue, is that there's a K through 12 school that's actually issuing 21st century skills, and our employers have no idea to handle them. They're like, well, what does this actually mean in my place of business? So what we ended up, you probably saw, we actually have a 21st century skills for healthcare workers on our badges. And we got the Greater Denver Metro Healthcare Partnership, which is like Centura Health and Kaiser Permanente. And for a year, they actually took what is communication in healthcare, and they defined the competencies. So we have a huge regional group that actually said, in healthcare, this is what communication means to us. And then we could actually design then what is the actual assessment for that, and what is the evidence for that? What is the critical thinking skills that are needed in healthcare? So that's where things are going to start working as an industry level. They're going to come to a common understanding of what it means.
Yeah, yeah. Let's take a question from the webinar audience.
Great. This question comes from Helen Adioson from CARE Academy. Is there any evidence of improved outcomes, for example, higher wages, length of time at job, mobility, et cetera, for micro-credentialing in low-wage jobs?
Fantastic question. Evidence of outcomes.
I would argue no. They're new. A lot of this is new. You know, David's talked a lot about how rapid things are changing. You know, I threw out a lot of statistics in the beginning about the growth. So the research that is out there, you know, on certificates is really based on old style statistics, old style certificates. Yeah. And it's an evolving field. And, you know, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, you know, almost, you know, and David's got impressive statistics on completions and things like that that's out there. But that was one of the areas for further knowledge that was on our slide.
Yeah, yeah.
That really needed.
We don't track them well. And,
right.
And we can't really, it is the Wild West. There's a proliferation of different micro-credentials. Among those that we somehow are able to track, we can't distinguish their nature. Right. So we can't, as you say, we can't separate the wheat from the chaff. And so we can't really say what the outcomes look like.
I would just add that there was the beginning of the development of more data, particularly in some of the states. Yeah. I heard recently that I think there were 11 states that are putting in accountability systems at the K-12 level, where they're providing some performance funding for students that receive, or for the school districts, where their students are receiving industry certifications in certain priority areas that are important to the state's economy, like cybersecurity or healthcare, et cetera. And in those cases, they're using the state's wage information to track whether or not the students are getting jobs. And of course, in that case, they'd be graduating from high school, and then they have some industry certifications, and then their pathways where they would go into college. So there's a beginning of development of data because folks are really interested in that return on investment question. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be seeing much more wage and employability data. And then what is the combination? It's probably not, does one micro-credential make a difference? My personal belief is, and I've got this hamburger story where if I go through the drive-through, like normally I just ask for one hamburger, and the guys are always saying, well, don't you want the combo? And I go, no, I don't want the combo. I don't like soft drinks. Yeah, but it would be better value. So then I debate the guy about whether or not I should have the combo meal. But I've come around to the idea that the combo is a really good idea, and because I've linked it in my mind to credentialing. Yeah. So I actually think, in the end, it's probably going to be a degree or diploma or something, plus 2 certificates, plus some industry certifications that will stand for skills, and that is the kind of world we're going to. It's just with different providers, it's going to be hard to go to multiple drive-thrus, if you get the analogy. But on the other hand, I feel like that is what we're going to do, so it's going to make their wage information very difficult to follow, because we're probably looking at combinations of credentials, and it probably doesn't matter if it's a micro-credential. I kind of wish we could just do away with micro. Yeah. These are all different types of credentials, and I don't know that a small one is any different than a big one, because we don't even know the size of the micro-credential. Right. Yeah. Right. So we could probably dispense with the title, sorry. That's all right. That does seem to be the name of the game. Yeah.
Yes, and as you know, in healthcare, you have to have the combination of credentials of you can't do anything with the degree, and you have to get the certification. And by the way, the reason I was questioning the certification as a micro is because the certification is supposed to validate everything in that bachelor's degree that they got, or master's degree for that matter, in that regard. And then licensure, because the state doesn't want to develop an exam, bases their licensure decision on the certification. So there's an example of how you really have to have 3 different types of credentials in order to even work.
Yeah, yeah. Questions in the room? Right here. Can you, great, take the microphone.
Harley Frazis, Bureau of Labor Statistics. Would you expect to see a decline in the value of a traditional degree in current data, or in the future?
Good question.
Personally, I think it all really depends a lot on what employers are going to do here. If employers still start listing degrees, it goes back to the employer practices. And, if employers still list degrees as opposed to skills, there's going to be that return on investment to degrees. But if they take the route that IBM is going and start listing skills, I think you're going to see a shift there. And I think a lot of the answer to that really depends on what employers do and how they go.
And I would say what schools do too. They have to really rethink the bachelor's degree and start to think about, is there a pathway forward to that? I don't know it has to be either or, right? It could be, it could take you 6 or 8 years or 9 years to get to a bachelor's degree. Maybe you don't want it right away. But why should all those prior learning credits that you get from all these other courses not count toward your bachelor's degree? So,
and we are seeing more and more schools stepping up, particularly in the community colleges, to embed industry certifications and badges into the traditional curriculum. So the students can really receive a degree. Hopefully they stay for the degree portion while they're acquiring industry certifications. And we've heard some employers say that's a really good deal for them, that rather than give it to a third party to do it, embed it in the college and university programs where they can do that. So then there is some research going on about, are we seeing more embedding going on, and what will that mean, and will students stay for the whole pack, for the combo deal or not? Because we feel like that's a trend, and probably a growing trend in many of the industry sectors.
And then a key question, a key research question then it becomes is exactly what you said, Holly, is does the embedding keep people going on in education? Does it motivate them to stay in and then get that degree because in the process they're getting other credentials? Or does it provide them an opportunity to leave and earn the money where they don't need the degree anymore?
Right.
But I think helps individuals because they do have something. And, you know, there used to be this measure of some college. Well, some college doesn't tell you much of anything. You know, did they take a course or did they get a certificate? So it's really, and like you said, it's more like if you do stop out, which could be for all kinds of reasons, you know, financial reasons, you know, illness. But if you have some credentials, you then may go back and you know, I think the more credentials we have and the more micro-credentials, the more stackable it becomes. Because really, I think stackable is sort of like a goal that we aren't really there yet, right?
That's the true combo where the value is, right?
And that's the big problem with the college transcript.
Yeah.
It's a big, huge piece, it's a piece of paper. Who cares?
Yeah.
Right? But if you're able to see the stack inside that.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, they do have the initiative now to look at competency-based transcripts, which is just in the beginning stages. The ACRO, the registrars are certainly looking at that. And then we even see the certifications like in the business degrees, like the PMP, the project management professional, is one that's very popular to embed in a bachelor's degree in this way. And then there's this whole idea that if you do away with the credit, then you have stackable certificate programs that lead to degrees. So if you move in and out for 9 years, you have certificates that you can show that what you can do. Because the biggest thing industry says, don't tell me what they know, tell me what they can do.
Yeah.
And that's trying to move that direction.
Let's take another question from the webinar audience.
Sure. This question comes from Anu Sita. She's a volunteer career coach for unemployed workers over the age of 45 through the New Start Career Network affiliated with Rutgers. She'd like to know how these certifications or badges are advertised. Is it through government-sponsored return-to-work programs? And also, what age demographic are you finding these certifications most successful?
Well, we don't really advertise very much on our program, but it's taken off. We've badged, I think, hundreds of thousands of people in the last year. Compared to our certification program, we used to certify about 40,000 people a year, something like that. Now we are badging, 400,000 or something like that. We found the demographics. We thought it was very interesting because back to the whole gamification and badges and Xbox, we really expected that it would be kind of a millennial play for us, but it isn't been the case. At least 50% of the people who've earned IBM badges are baby boomers and older. So that was a surprise. And then I asked somebody about that was my age, the baby boomer age, and she said, well, we created this stuff, right? We created Pac-Man. Of course we're, so don't discount us yet, right? So no, there's no age limit. And in fact, one of the programs we're working on right now is to try to mid-career people who have retired from the military, how do we bring them back into the workforce?
Good, good.
Well, I would say for her particularly, because of this statistic that 10, we might even give them 15% are reviewed by a third party, that helping people get certifications, there are a lot of certifications to nowhere. And so it's really important to understand how to look at certifications. And we do think that, I keep coming back to Credential Engine, but it is one of the things that we think is important.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question? A very quick question. Okay, this has been occurring to me the whole time we've been talking here. I wonder the extent to which right now, it might change in the future, right now, are people using micro-credentials more to gain new skills or to try to actually document and demonstrate skills that they maybe already have?
At least with the community college system, they are gaining new skills. And it's gaining new skills to get them employed.
Gaining new skills to not only get them to stay employed, but to stay employed in their existing job, right? And move up. So,
and to be able to move up.
Gaining skills.
Yeah, good, great. All right, so I need to shut us down, I guess, right? So I'm going to take the podium again. I just want to thank you all again for attending today's forum. If we were unable to get to your question, please please feel free to, for those of you who are here, to ask our panelists outside in the reception. And for those of you on the webinar, you can always email us at CIRE. My email address is there, the CIRE email address is there, and we'll forward your questions on to the relevant respondent. Please be sure to let us know how you did by completing the electronic survey, which is available to all webinar participants at the close of the session, and will be sent to all of you in-person participants via email. Again, thank you very much. All right.